So, you've got an iPhone, right? Or a Mac, maybe an iPad. Then you know Safari. It's just there, a quiet, constant presence on over 1 billion of these devices. We use it every single day, probably without even thinking about it. But have you ever actually stopped to wonder what its story is? So let's get into it. Because Safari, well, it's not just another app icon on your screen. No, its story is all about some serious corporate strategy, a total obsession with engineering, and this really complicated relationship it has with the very web it's supposed to help us explore. All right, to really get Safari, we've got to rewind the clock. We have to go back to a time when, believe it or not, Apple didn't control the browser on its own machines. You know, back in the late 90s, if you were using a Mac, your gateway to the internet was Microsoft's Internet Explorer. Yeah, seriously. There was this 5-year deal that made it the default. And as you can imagine, that dependency really pushed Apple to start a secret project to build their own thing. That thing was finally unveiled by Steve Jobs in 2003. But the real game changer, just 4 years later, it landed on the very first iPhone, and boom, it basically defined how we'd all use the internet on our phones from then on. And when Steve Jobs got on stage to introduce Safari, he didn't start with a boring list of features. Nah, he led with one single core promise. He called it, and I love this, a turbo browser. Right from day one, the whole mission was just speed. And that obsession with performance, it wasn't just some marketing line for a keynote speech. It became a fundamental part of Safari's DNA. And honestly, it's still a huge deal for them today. So Apple is constantly claiming that Safari is the fastest browser in the world. And when you look at their own tests, you can kind of see what they're talking about. See, when you're running really complex web apps, Safari on a Mac just blows past its main rival, Chrome, on the exact same computer. It is absolutely engineered to be hyper-efficient on its own home turf. And this isn't some new thing either. The groundwork for all this speed was laid years ago with stuff like the Nitro JavaScript engine. I mean, this was the tech that made websites stop feeling so clunky and start feeling more like these smooth, super responsive apps we're used to now. But look, on the modern web, speed isn't the only battlefield anymore, right? Over the last decade or so, Safari's identity has really evolved to focus on another massive pillar, your privacy. Okay, so the heart of this whole privacy push is a technology called Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP. Now, what's so clever about it is how it works. Instead of using some giant cloud-based list of bad guys, ITP uses the machine learning right there on your phone or Mac to figure out who's trying to follow you from site to site, and then it just shuts them down. So what does that actually mean for you when you're just browsing? Well, it's basically a 3-step process happening in the background. First, Safari spots the trackers. Second, it builds a wall around them, cutting off their access to the little bits of data they use to build a profile on you. And third, it actually shows you what it's been doing with that simple privacy report. You can see exactly who it blocked on any website you visit. But you know, while Apple definitely positions Safari as this big privacy champion, the story, well, it's not quite that simple. A lot of critics point out that some changes Apple made to help browser extensions work ended up crippling some of the most powerful ad blockers out there, like the super popular uBlock Origin, which just doesn't work on Safari anymore. Of course, you really can't talk about any Apple product without talking about the ecosystem, right? And for Safari, this is its ultimate secret weapon. I mean, if you're all in on Apple's world, Safari makes everything feel incredibly connected. With handoff, you can be reading an article on your iPhone, walk over to your Mac, and just toss it over to finish reading on the big screen. iCloud tabs means everything you have open is synced everywhere. And then you have newer stuff like Passkeys and Apple Pay, which are just designed to work flawlessly across every single one of your devices. It's a really powerful reason to stick around. And this right here marks a huge turning point. Believe it or not, for a little while, Apple actually made a version of Safari for Windows. But back in 2012, they just pulled the plug. And that was pretty much the moment the whole walled garden strategy became official. Safari wasn't for everybody anymore. It was now exclusively for Apple users. And those walls, they are at their absolute highest on the iPhone and iPad. You might have downloaded Chrome or Firefox from the App Store, but here's the thing. Underneath it all, they are required to use Apple's own browser engine, WebKit. What that means is that no other browser can truly compete with Safari on performance or unique features. And that's a practice that critics, and now even government regulators, are calling anti-competitive. And this brings us to the final, and maybe the most complicated piece of the Safari puzzle, This is where the shiny ideals of privacy and user experience slam right into the cold, hard realities of big business. Let's start with a number: 36%. Thanks to some recent antitrust trials, we now know that this is the cut of advertising revenue that Google pays to Apple for every search that's made through Safari. So what does 36% actually look like in dollars? Well, in 2022 alone, it was estimated to be $20 billion. Think about that. This one deal makes Google, a company whose entire business model is often seen as the opposite of Apple's privacy message, one of Apple's most important partners. So that leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? Is Safari a champion for the user, built to protect us with incredible speed and privacy? Or has its dominant position turned it into a powerful gatekeeper, one that shapes the web while making billions from the very data-hungry company it claims to protect you from? You know, the real story seems to be that somehow it's both.